Hello and welcome. I'm so glad to have you back with us for another session of On Book. My name is Danielle Mages-Amato. I'm the literary manager and dramaturg at the Old Globe. And on behalf of the staff, board, and artists of the theater, I want to welcome you to this online Shakespeare reading club. This week, we've begun our discussion of Henry V. If you're with us on Wednesday, we had Professor Abe Stoll, talk to us about sort of the genre of the history play. And today, I'm very happy to welcome an actor and professor, someone who's both taught the play in class and has played the title role. So let me see if I can bring on. Hello, I have with us actor Professor Ray Chambers today. Ray currently teaches in the Old Globe USD Shiley Graduate Acting Program. He spent nearly 2 decades as an associate artist with the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, where he spent nearly a decade as the director of their Master of Fine Arts professional theater training program. Just a few of his Shakespeare credits include title roles in Hamlet, Richard III, Coriolanus, King John, and of course, Henry V, along with leading roles in Julius Caesar, The Winter's Tale, Henry IV. Is that Henry IV parts 1, 2, both?
Both.
And if you've been a longtime Globe audience member, you may have seen him in Shakespeare's, including Antony and Cleopatra, The Comedy of Errors, Coriolanus, Love's Labour's Lost, Hamlet, the Scottish play. It's a very distinguished resume of Shakespeare plays. So thank you so much for joining us today for that, Ray.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Let's see. Let's start by talking a little bit about your own history with Henry V. How many times have you been in it? How many times you have seen it, maybe? And I wonder if you can remember maybe early experiences with the play, early times you've read it, and how your later experience of acting in it or teaching it has changed your mind about it, things that have surprised you or that you've learned over the years having experience with the play.
Well, I've only played in it once. And for the Shakespeares, that's kind of unusual. I mean, there's still a couple of plays that I haven't even looked at. I mean, as far as actually playing Henry VIII and Two Noble Kinsmen. But other than that, you know, I've been in the room while it's at least being rehearsed for all the plays. But no, Henry V I've only been in it once, and that was playing Henry V. But it was also, I was so blessed. I mean, I was so remarkably lucky in that I played actually Hal in the Henry IV parts 1 and 2, and then led into Henry. So, and in fact, I was in Richard II as Almerle. So it's like I went through the whole series of leading up to Henry V.
Yeah, with Professor Stoll, with Abe, we talked about that tetralogy and the idea that it sort of moves from Richard II to Henry IV's part 1 and 2, and then into Henry V. So it's nice to have had that whole tetralogy to sort of move through.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, is working with an acting company, you know, which is very rare these days. But boy, it's like, I wish I could get every student that, you know, I've ever worked with the opportunity to say, hey, let's go a tetralogy with that stuff. You know, let's see what happens when you're actually going through from you've got 3 plays, I mean, 3 different plays in order that's showing the entire arc of the character, at least till after, you know, a certain part of their life. So that you just don't get that in other plays. You know, it's so rare. And that's really, I mean, that's marvelous. I mean, I find this play to be, there are so many things I remember about it, performing it, but there's so many things, like you asked the question, it's like, what changes as you look at a play differently? And all of Shakespeare changes depending on when you pick it up. again. You know, it's like I look back like on Hamlet in particular. It's like when I first read Hamlet, I thought Hamlet was me, and I thought, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, it's my life story right there. And it's not, you know, and then now I'm looking at Polonius, you know, I'm like saying, oh, I get Polonius completely. So it depends on when you pick it up, and it's the same thing with Henry's though. I mean, the history plays themselves though are very difficult because you got all these names. I mean, that's the thing that I find most people go, okay, I don't know what the heck's going on because there's too many names. Who's this and who's this and who's this? I mean, the great thing about seeing a history play is that the status, like who's actually in charge of the room, happens in a rehearsal, right? So you get the actor to do that for you. They let that status happen. And we take on so much realizing that, you know, Henry V is the king maybe in it, but he's not the only one with status in the room, you know. And so what does the Bishop of Ely do? What is, you know, or Carlisle, you know, or who is his brothers? Like, what is his relationship with his brothers? And how do they, Clarence, Humphrey, how do they, when they speak, what kind of status do they have in the room? You know, and that's what's really cool. So, but looking at the names when we read them though, that's tough. That's really tough. And I have to look them up all the time, you know, so.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I was saying, I remember using bookmarks with all the names printed on it. So I didn't have to keep flipping through the play so many times because it can be challenging. I'm curious, as an actor, what are the particular challenges of acting in a history play? I mean, are they different to act in? You've obviously done comedies, tragedies, histories. Is there something unique about the challenges of performing in a history play?
Well, I think no, it's like, kind of like I say, the names. You have to know who's who. Now, granted, you know, even the English history, even in Elizabethan England, most of the audience would not have known many of these characters. So, you know, I mean, like Henry V to the Elizabethan audience is sort of like, you know, us. I don't know. It's like us doing a musical of, you know, someone called Alexander Hamilton, you know, or something like that. It's like we're looking back on a history that none of us really knew, yet we hear about certain things in the history books, and then we see something fictionalized and come to us, and we see how it relates to today also. So I mean, I think like sometimes I get into the idea of, well, the historical figures should we be doing research as actors? Should we see who these people were? And I find that fascinating because Shakespeare was not creating historical accuracy. He was, you know, based upon the Holinshed, you know, going on the histories that he was working on. He then changed even those and turned them into what is it that makes it relevant for today? And for him, for the Elizabethan audience, what made it relevant? And so let's change these characters around. And sometimes they're political too, because, you know, such as Richard III, he's the greatest villain in, you know, Shakespeare writes in the history plays. But that's because, you know, Queen Elizabeth could see that show, who's the daughter of Henry VIII, you know what I mean? So that's the different faction. So you can't, you know, you've got to be careful who you turn into a villain or a hero. And in this one's fascinating. Yeah.
What's your sense of what was important to the audience at the time with Henry V? We talked about this a little bit with Abe, and it's interesting to know that he was saying, like, you know, people would have known who Henry V was, but I think what you're pointing out is that people might not have known X bishop or Y, and, you know, and he's added these characters who are not only the characters who were written about in Holinshed, but these other different classes of characters, common people. So you have maybe a history that was in some sense known, but not in the detail in which he would have just told the story, the fictionalized story.
Right, right. I sometimes think that maybe, I think that all of Shakespeare's plays, I have this fantasy in my head that he was sitting in a bar with Marlowe or Ben Jonson or someone, and they were just throwing out stuff, you know, and you know, and in this case, it's like Henry V, I think it's so unique. First of all, there's so many theatrical terms used in Henry V. So how does that relate to the theater? Why does it become a meta theatrical sort of experience where someone comes out and acknowledges, hey, we're all in a theater, so let's use our imagination. And then
would you talk more about that? What would you give us some specific examples of theatrical terms and metaphors that are used in Henry V?
Well, we've got the chorus who just directly comes out, and this is cool too, because he doesn't, you know, Shakespeare doesn't use a chorus very often. I think it's just three chorus, and only two that are listed as a chorus. But, you know, to have an actor come out on stage and begin a play and say, okay, I want you to sit back and I want you to imagine something, you know, And some say, of course, it was the reopening of the Globe after the fire. So this was the first play that was performed once the Globe was opened. Although scholars disagree with that too, because he was also working at the Curtain Theater at that time too. So who knows? But I love that idea that let's open up a new theater with drawing attention to the idea that we're in a theater. And now let's try to tell the story of Henry V. I think probably Ben Jonson probably told him, it's like, no, you're going to open up a theater. You need to have, a remarkably heroic Greek character open it for you, and they're probably saying, no. They said, oh, no, what about Henry V? And probably, they would say, no, you can't do it. There's too many battles. It's all about war. He was a warrior, and that's what we know him for. But yet he wrote a play. He wrote a play that doesn't have a single battle scene in it. Not a single battle. It's about, the theme could be war, leadership during war, or sometimes the horrors of war or whatever. It could be so many, but it's about war. It's about a small group of people that are taking on the biggest army in the world. And what happens in the middle of that war, and for what reasons and for what purposes. And Henry V himself was just, he starts all this guerrilla warfare. Okay, back to your question, because you were asking about how.
I want to cover all of the stuff that you're talking about. As we were talking about the chorus on last time's session, one of the questions from the group was, how would that have been performed? Is that we see the word chorus. I think we think of these Greek choruses where 10 people are chanting in song, or we think, I'm wondering if you have a sense of, how that would have been performed and how it tends to be performed today when people do these sort of choral interludes.
Yeah, well, probably with Shakespeare, it was just meant for an actor, because they only had a certain number of actors, and everybody, and especially with something like this where you need as many people as you need to play both the French and the English army. So it would have just been one person who would have come out, but they would have taken on there's things in the Greek theater, choruses like Sophoclean choruses actually use both the epic, dramatic, and lyric style. In other words, they can go epic, meaning they can go through time. So a chorus can come out and say, hey, we're with you right now in this theater watching Ajax, or whatever. They can say, this is we're in the time now. We're going to move all the way back to blank and see this too, which is what this chorus does in Henry V. Say, let's go back in time, let's do this. And you all know the stories of the legend of the man. And right off the bat, the chorus is also saying, it's like, let's assume the port of Mars, if only we had princes to act on the stage, or monarchs to behold the swelling scene, So
that first speech, one of the most famous, I would say, from the play and maybe in all of Shakespeare. Yeah,
people know, oh, for a muse of fire. And that idea of let's use our imagination but he's talking about, they're putting in really, really high terms. Henry V is too big to touch. Such a legend in English history, at least, such a legend. But yet we will, and we'll go back into the dramatic, the chorus will take us about, okay, now imagine that you're this place and now let's meet Henry. Here he is, except he does it in much better language than that. It says, and here it is, and it takes us into the scene. So the chorus starts all 5 acts, and it continues, and so is able to jump over time, also to lyrically comment upon what's happening. He even brings up probably, God, is it Sussex? I'm forgetting. It's one of the noblemen who was that was Elizabethan, who was actually out in Ireland creating a war, creating a battle at this time. There was a big campaign, and so that evening, that chorus is mentioning Sussex doing what he's doing in Ireland. So it's sort of like us coming out and talking about the Iraq War, or whatever war we happen to be in at the time, to the people that we're talking to. So they can jump over time. They can do lyric, or they can be dramatic. They can actually be a part of the conversation and get in a conversation with a character, which is a lot of times why the chorus is also played. Usually they end up becoming one of the soldiers and before the Agincourt War or battle, and so talking to the king too. So that chorus is, so he meant it as Shakespeare meant it as a one-person thing, but it goes all over the map, like Greek chorus.
What are the other plays of Shakespeare's that you reference that have choruses in them?
Winter's Tale has time. And the other one is I forget now.
Quiz. It's not a quiz. We're just curious in case people wanted to look at other examples. But if you look at, I know in the Winter's Tale, the chorus again leads us through time during a big shift that we have to create during the play, where we go 16 years into the future. So it allows us, just like the chorus in this play, sort of talks us through. Okay, here's where we are. Here's where we're going next. Don't get lost. Don't get confused.
Oh, Pericles, where it goes over the same amount of time as Winter's Tale, except it doesn't skip 17 years or 14 years. It skips, a couple of months.
Other people throwing in Romeo and Juliet as having that initial chorus that begins the play, but not one that talks us through perhaps the action in the same way. And yes, here we had another person say, yes, Pericles, sort of. You mentioned, are there other theatrical metaphors or techniques that Shakespeare is using in this play? And what do you think he was referencing theater so strongly for this particular story? Do you think it's purely the opening of the new theater, or are there things about the plot or the story that he wants to tell that benefit from a theatrical metaphor?
Well, I think the theme, or we could say just the theme of war, that's not a theme, but let's say it is for a moment. If it's just the topic of war and how we know Henry V, how Henry V has come through us in history and into the Elizabethans in history as a great warrior king. He didn't actually reign that long historically, but he did an awful lot as far as moving on, conquering a lot of lands, right? Which was all lost in the following generation. But the chorus comes out and says, this is what we're going to be talking about, this remarkable legend. Then we get to see the actual person, and we get to see the mistakes that he makes, and we get to see the way this play actually ends up calling out how they even go to war is based upon the Henry IV Part 1 and 2, what he learns from his father in those two plays. Hal thinks that he knows his father and he doesn't want to have anything to do with that sort of thing. And he wasn't born into the royal world, like historically, we don't know who Hal was. We don't know how he was born. We don't know where he was born, even what year he was born necessarily, because no one paid attention. If you're not going to be a king, no one's paying attention to you, right? So when his father comes along, Bolingbroke comes in and takes over the crown, then suddenly Hal becomes Prince Hal. And so he's next in line because he's the oldest brother of five. He has like 2 sisters and 3 brothers, I think, and they show up in the play. Well, the sisters don't, but the brothers do. And they okay, I just got off track. What was I talking about?
You're talking about theatricality in the play, I think. But another thing I'd love to talk about, which you started getting a little bit into, is as an actor, the journey of this character, or the types of things that this character has to embody on stage. And maybe that's partly as an actor who has played it, and partly as a teacher or director assigning an actor to this part. Like, what are some of the things that a Henry V has to do during the course of the play? What are the qualities that he has to embody, or the things that this actor has to do to string this whole play together? Because you're really sort of like stringing an entire plot together on the back of one actor in a lot of ways. And I'm curious what the challenges of that are, or what is some of that journey that the actor has to take embodying this central character?
Well, I think that as far as what the actor needs, I think, is the same thing for almost every lead in Shakespeare, or the lead, who has a remarkably large arc from beginning to end. So that in itself is just a challenge, and of figuring out how you go from moment to moment to moment without telling the end of the story, without playing ahead of time or telegraphing something, but play in the moment as truthfully as possible, and it leads down this remarkable journey. With Henry, you've got in the very beginning, he starts off, and we start the play off with him asking about, is there any way that we can go to war? Right? Can you clerics, is there any law out there that would say, can we go to war? And they go through a very long, about the Salic law, about how it goes through the French, the mother, it's a maternal secession as opposed to a paternal, and that this happens. So he says, yeah, you actually have claim to France. which interestingly enough, we don't realize it, but it's like, so does the British monarchy today. They still officially have the title of, like, Queen Elizabeth is actually Queen of France. That's her title. Huh. Yeah. Don't tell the French. Yeah. Yeah. So it's still a part of that. It's still, you know, okay, I'm going to go off tangent here, but it's like, also realize it's that Henry V was the first one who made English. This is all those like cool historical things. Henry V was the first king who actually stopped doing all diplomacy and court matters in French. His father started it by speaking English. He was the first one to actually speak English in court. But Henry said, can we stop sending all these plans about our battle plans in French with a horseman? Can we start doing it in a different language instead of, you know, our enemy's language? So he was the first one to actually make it official that English was the language of England, the court language. And so he changed that around. But all that sort of stuff, like, it starts popping in there. Henry was also, you know, when he kills the prisoners in this play, because he doesn't have enough people to actually guard them.
Yeah.
And this, and of course, the French had already come behind the lines of battle and killed the boys, the children who were taking care of their base camp in a way. So he killed, you know, they already did that. And so it looks pretty much like revenge. In a hero play where we're trying to see, oh, this is the great Henry V, he does so many things that Shakespeare does not shy away from in this play. That's pretty remarkably cruel. I mean, and change the warfare. You know, historically, he attacked at night, which was completely against every rule of engagement.
Yeah.
He also burnt those officers, the prisoners. He actually burnt them. He put them all in a barn and burnt them.
Wow. So
the guerrilla warfare that he was doing, you know, was made out of desperation. There were only a couple of hundred of them going after this huge army. But it started all with that idea of, do I have a claim to the throne? And he's balancing whether or not he wants to go to war, because his dad told him, go to war as soon as you can, because it'll get all the Irish, it'll get the Welsh, it'll get the all the people that make up England together fighting against a foreigner. So, you know, so he says, I don't feel right about doing that. And then the Dauphin brings in a birthday present, you know, congratulations on your coronation, King Henry. And we bring you this present, and it's a thing of tennis balls, you know, which is referencing that he's a playboy. And he's all about leisure, and this isn't being serious. And of course, then Henry says, okay, we're going to go to war, you know, which isn't necessarily a good reason, especially when you're putting so much of your country at stake, to go to war over a personal insult.
Yeah.
But he does, you know, and he does that throughout the entire play. So as far as the stretch goes between what an actor needs, he's got battle scenes, the Harfleur, even though we don't ever see any battles, they just got through the gate. The Harfleur speech is one of, come on, people, help me out here, right? And he inspires them to go back through the breach, you know, and get that war going. And then if you compare that with the very end of the play, where suddenly not suddenly, it actually historically took a long time to do it, but right after the battle's over and they realize they've won, then the next thing we see is the peace treaty. And he gets to actually meet the person who has promised him the daughter, Catherine, of the French king. And that's very, very awkward scene. We suddenly see a person who only knows battle, and he's very upfront and says, listen, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to wooing. I don't know it at all. So can we just sit and talk about this a little bit? I'll try my best and do it in French, you know, and it's the only scene we have in Shakespeare where you have actually playing off the idea of what is it in French and what is it in English. It's really kind of cool.
I mean, it feels to me like an epic. I mean, especially if you're playing him from Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, then to have to take, you know, comic tavern scenes, rousing battle scenes, cruelty to prisoners, romance. Like, it feels like, oh my gosh, who's this amazing actor who's going to pull all this off and string this giant piece together?
Well, but it's so damn well written. You know, it really is. It's like he and Catherine's scene is beautiful. It's wonderful. It's like, and you learn so much about the human being even though you feel like you've went through a Hamlet and understanding the person, you know, you've seen like all of that epic just the scope of everything you've seen in that play so far, or the Henry IVs. But then that Catherine scene shows someone who doesn't, he's not a lover.
Mm-hmm.
How did he do this? You know, and so you see him at his most vulnerable in the last scene of the play, in a way, you know?
Well, thinking back to performing in the play, are there particular scenes that you were like, and maybe we've already covered them, oh gosh, I have to hit this moment or the play is not going to work as well? Like, it's like, I have to get that big speech. I have to get that romance. Or is there any scene that you can recall in playing the part that was like, oh, that was the key to it for me? It was really hitting that moment.
Well, I mean, keeping like the Henry IVs as a part of that, in the Henry IVs, we have, this was very key to me for doing Henry V, was understanding why he's actually hanging out with Falstaff and Pistol and Nym and Bardolph, you know, with that whole group of, you know, bad guys, you know, commoners who just like to drink and steal things, you know. So that making that plan, and he has it at the very top of Henry IV Part 1, he says, I have a plan. And everybody thinks that I'm not going to amount to anything, but there will be a day in which I will shine next to what I am, you know, to the dirt, the something shiny that you see in the mud, you know, a sword or whatever, you know, and he compares it to that. He says, I do have a plan, you know, and that's the only time that the character speaks alone in those three plays, you know, is that first plan. And so I think it's important. That's sort of a guiding post. It was like, okay, well, what do you think's going on? You know, he so disdains his father in so many ways. He talks him down. One scene that's really important in the Eastcheap scenes in Henry IV Part 1 is Falstaff is talking to him and not being very nice to his dad either. You know, Falstaff is degrading his father in some way. And Hal comes up and starts, you know, and not, he doesn't defend his father. In fact, he makes more fun of him. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to see the production that I was in. We made a pact, and this was really good. This is a really good rule to use. No one in the Eastcheap scenes laughs unless it's funny. So don't do any reactions. It's about, you know, it was trying to get a bunch of people in this bar who were drinking to have a conversation or to talk to each other, or perhaps to make out with someone. I don't know. It's whatever. It was happening in a bar and people were drinking. But once you had to like really work to get people's attention. And then once you did that, you were trying to up the other, like Falstaff and Hal were trying to up each other on who could get the biggest laugh, right? But we made the rule, no one is to laugh. No one is to laugh by direction. You know what I mean? No, if you find something funny, you do. And it was remarkable. I mean, it was really remarkable. It turned into a remarkable scene where, especially Hal's making fun of his own father. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, and doing even an imitation of his father that started cracking people up. And that's how that ended up working. But like taking that into Henry V is like, no, he can work that way with people. Mm-hmm. He can actually work that way with people so that when we see him in Henry V, right on the Battle of Agincourt, the evening before the Battle of Agincourt, we can hear the doubt and the vulnerability and actually saying, am I doing the right thing? You know, and then defending himself, you know. Shakespeare has a couple of characters in his plays where they go into hiding or they become a commoner. I mean, even Antony and Cleopatra were known for that, of going into the common crowd and saying, this is who you know, what do you think about the king, you know, in disguise, you know? So there are so many scenes in it. I mean, it's like, yeah, there are these high points that you have to hit, but there's also the human element. That's why the evening before Agincourt is beautiful, because it's about, he thinks he's not going to make it, and everyone around him thinks they're not going to make it. Mm-hmm. You know, which then starts making sense about why he kills the prisoners and things like that, because he tells a commoner that night, a soldier, saying, no, the king will not be ransomed. The king will not be ransomed. In other words, he won't be taken alive and the French make money off of him. Sure. He'll be killed too. Or I'll make sure of that, you know? And so it does, even just, again, going back to the commoner, it instructs, I think, Henry into making better decisions about things from looking at the layman's point of view.
I'm wondering, as an actor who spent so much time with Shakespeare's text, I know that you teach the MFA actors a Shakespeare boot camp every year to help them come to learn about what Shakespeare's language is, especially, and how it works. And I'm wondering if there are techniques that you use as an actor to approach the language, or techniques that you teach actors to approach the language that could be beneficial to people who are reading the play. I mean, we've heard that we're reading it out loud. That's one of the techniques that obviously is repeated over and over. But other than that, are there techniques that you use as an actor or teach actors that you think could be helpful to people reading the plays?
Well, I got to admit, I'm dyslexic, and so I didn't actually learn to read and write till I was 14.
Wow.
And I came across there were a couple of exercises that people were taking me through, and I came across the right exercise that suddenly a light bulb went off, and I was able to do that. Then I caught up after that, but I couldn't read up to that point. But one of the things I noticed, and why I can read Shakespeare rather easily, is because my subject, verb, and object orders can change around a lot. And I'm okay with that, because there's a real difference. But that's why I say read this stuff out of that. The best thing you can do is read it out loud, especially something you're not quite understanding. Just read it out loud, because Shakespeare's actually writing the way we speak in most cases, not the way we write. And so we learn to read things based upon a grammar that is completely different from a human being trying to express an idea. Such as, Shakespeare is full of, okay, where's the object? There's no object in that sentence, but when you say it out loud, sometimes you can actually figure out like internal questions. Like that's one of them. Like you have a question that happens in the middle of a verse line, and then you don't have a capitalized next letter, like a new idea. It's actually still a part of that question. But have you ever actually asked a question in the middle of something, it changes, and then finally it becomes a statement?
Mm-hmm. Just
kind of like what I did right there. Yeah. But that is so cool, because we actually do that in life all the time.
Sure.
But we don't have grammar that allows it's either a question or a statement as far as our punctuation goes. So how do you express those ideas in a way that you can actually speak them, as opposed to read them and understand them?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would still go back to the idea of read it out loud, see what happens. Also, sometimes just trying to figure out what the meaning of something is, find your subjects, verbs, and objects, and realize that they can go in any order. And how would you say that? How would you say that in life today, in your own words, and maybe have to change the subject, verb, and the object around. Now, that's only if you're talking about one line that's really bothering you. You can't do the whole play that way. But I do suggest reading it out loud. And also, the more you read it, the easier and easier it gets. And there's just something, there's nothing like reading his plays. By the time you're halfway through the canon, you're a master at reading his plays.
See, there we go. We can all be masters. I'm going to take a question here from the chat. If other people have questions for Ray, please feel free to type them into the chat. One of our folks said, I love Coriolanus. I think you mentioned Coriolanus pretty early on in our conversation. And I've never understood why it doesn't perform more often. Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Well, Coriolanus is yeah, I know. I mean, it's like, if I have to say a favorite, Coriolanus is right there at the top.
Really? That's interesting. What makes it a favorite?
Because it does have, I think, well, one, I saw at the Globe, Byron Jennings played Coriolanus. This was during the Iran-Contra hearings. John Hirsch directed it. It was really different for the Globe. There were monitors all over the inside of the Globe, so that, dozens and dozens of monitors that were showing the Ollie North tapes. Okay.
Really? During the production?
Yeah. And so that's how it started out, when you were watching, Ollie North being interviewed or on stand. And then we had, and then the play started, and it was set modern, but it was something slightly in the future where there are the haves and the have-nots. And that was the theme of that play, is what is leadership, and what do the people own? What do they deserve?
Sure. Are
we all one group, or are there different societal are there different strata, and stuff like that? But it's it is a brilliant play. And I've never, and in fact, there were some people that saw that play. My wife's grandmother saw the play. doesn't and likes theater. Okay, she came there, and it's all she talked about for months.
Really? That's so interesting.
How it got her thinking about society today. So yeah, it's a pretty brilliant play.
Somebody in our chat actually saw Byron Jennings' production, and they have commented, although, oh, here it is. Look, I've got it now. I've got it. Byron Jennings' production was fascinating. Yeah. I think, look, if I were to answer that question, I would say just the name is not something that people are as familiar with. And so I think there's a push to do plays that people have heard of. I don't know, or at least to balance plays people have heard of with plays people are not as familiar with. So I know that Coriolanus has I would say in the last decade or two had a lot of more productions that I've seen of it. So maybe it's having its moment. Seems like it will definitely have its moment. Well, I think, please go ahead.
Right, all plays do have that, I think we've gone through just, the most recent one has been probably Much Ado. I cannot tell you how many Much Ados I've seen in the last 6 years, it's just like, it's done everywhere, and then it will fade away, and then something like Two Gentlemen of Verona will take its place, or something else that we just don't see very much of.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Ray. This has been really useful, really helpful. I really appreciate hearing your perspective and your sharing your expertise with us. And I will continue to take questions here in the chat if folks want to ask more questions. Otherwise, we are at our sort of time here. So thank you so much again. And I appreciate your time. Folks, if you want to join us again next week, I think we're going to talk a little bit about stage combat. In the history plays and how that happens and how that works. So please come back and join us. Oh, wait, we had one more question before we go. What? Sorry, one last question. Do you think that Hal is the most heroic character in the play? That's an interesting question.
Well, if he's the most heroic in the Henry IV's parts 1 and 2, no. Is the most heroic in Henry V? No. I would say he's the most human.
Oh, that's great.
Like of all the battles, we only get 2 people that actually, that's Pistol and Lefeu from the French. So we see the French and in English touch their swords, and that's it. That's the only battles that we get. Mm-hmm. So yet, still, if that's the theme, war and what it does, then I'm not sure if Henry's the most heroic. I think he makes mistakes, and he just lucks out.
Yeah. Well, I think as we discussed last week, I think the fact that there's a very human character as opposed to a sort of generically heroic character at the center of this play is one of the things that makes it a really powerful play and a really good read, especially for a history play, which can be more challenging. So, all right, on that note, thank you all, and we will be back with you again next week. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.